Okay, so tonight's class is an interesting one. It's an interesting one because it's an interesting time. And the topic that we've named it is Torah for difficult times, Torah for challenging times, Torah for tough times. And that topic is actually a little bit of a new one for us in the sense that if we look at the world that we have around us, we'll notice and that we're particularly blessed. For the most part, hold on, I'm just trying to, for the most part, if we look at what our world is around us, we see that we're blessed with things like good health and religious freedom and, an economy that generally goes up, and the state of Israel, beautiful community with wonderful infrastructure in it and wonderful family lives. So most of the time, most of our topics have been to say, Hodul Hashem Ki Tov, how wonderful our lives are, how wonderful things are. And we mean it and we feel it, and it's usually our message. And that's been the case until, very recently, where this little coronavirus, which you look at the picture of it and it actually, it looks like a floral arrangement or something like that. But it's wreaking havoc on the entire world and everything that we know. And even many of the barachot that we showed just a second ago are not as simple and not as safe. And we're going to talk about some of those things. And really, when we're in a situation, any kind of situation, we want to ask ourselves, what does the Torah have to say? What guidance can we get from our tradition? What are the holy books, whether it be the Torah, the Gemara, the rabbis, what do they have to say about what we're going through? We always want to know that, but the more we get into a situation where it's a challenging situation and where we have lots of fears, worries, concerns, it's all the more of a reason to ask the question of what can Judaism, what can Torah give us? What messages can it have? And so what I'd like to share with you for the next half hour or so is some interesting things that I've come across over the last week to 10 days. And I think that they have lots and lots of lessons that are important for us to learn. Some of them maybe even a little bit cute, but some of them quite serious. So let's look. The Torah does talk about plagues in different cases, but it's usually not on the Jews, and it's usually to a very specific situation. So I really want to turn to the Gemara, even though there are places in the Tanakh that we could look at. But the Gemara really has something that I think is very intriguing, very interesting, and that's particular advice. And here you have in front of you a Gemara from Masechet Bava Kama, and it's a little bit lengthy. It's actually longer than what you even see here. So I'm just going to highlight a couple of different points that are in this Gemara. But you can see from the very first line, it's Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis taught, Dever Ba'ir. So if there's Dever, and we recognize the word Dever from one of the Makot, a plague, a pestilence, when there's a plague in the city, Kanes Raglecha, enter your feet. And of course, enter your feet seems to imply go inside, quarantine yourself, lock yourself in, and so on and so forth, to protect yourself from that plague. And it actually brings 3 pisukim to prove this out. And you see them listed in the 1, 2, 3. The first we're familiar with because it's from Yetziat Mitzrayim and the Makat Bechorot, where it says, V'atem lo tetz'u ish mepetach beto ad boker. People should not leave their house at night until the morning. And that was, of course, due to Makat Bechorot. And we're all familiar with the Makat Bechorot. Got a little bit of a picture of it here, where the people were inside and the plague was outside, and everyone was supposed to stay inside. One of the interesting things that we see from this reading of the Torah about this plague is that it seems very interesting that the people had to go inside and stay inside and put signs over the doors and so on. Why didn't Hashem simply have the plague strike the things that it was supposed to strike and not strike the things that it wasn't? It seems like when a plague is going on, there's a certain overwhelming, complete attack, and it's not specific to one or another. Anyway, there are 2 other pisukim. Lech ami, this is from Yeshayahu, a little less well known. Lech ami bo b'chadarecha, go my people, go inside your rooms, and close the doors behind you. Another pasuk which implies going inside. And then a third pasuk which says, "Mechutz tishakel cherev u'machadarim ema." In the outside, the sword, which I guess here is a metaphor for the plague, is causing bereavement, and the inside, or from inside, there is trepidation, fear. So these three pisukim are all getting across this point, which we can kind of relate to, which is when a plague is happening, go inside, be inside the homes. Now the Gemara actually expands upon this, and if you're even a little bit familiar with the Gemara, you know there's something strange here, because you don't normally need three pisukim. Normally, one pasuk will suffice. The normal way a Gemara works is it makes a statement and it will bring a pasuk to back it up. Why do you have three pisukim? So the Gemara talks about it. I'm not going to go into all the details, but it says you need three pisukim because you might have questions. You may say, oh, the first pasuk only teaches me that I have to be inside at night, but who knows in the day? Maybe in the day it's also okay. And then the other one is, well, maybe the inside is also frightening, and it says, well, the outside is more frightening. And so that's the idea that you have in the Gemara, is this idea of when there's a plague, go inside. And we're going to actually take off on this Gemara and see some of the opinions that some of our rabbis had to say about this Gemara, but it's very clear to say that in a plague, go inside. The idea of a quarantine is quite old, not something new. And one of the interesting things that it says, and we were talking about the mashchit, the plague, and here's an artistic image of it. But one of the next lines in the Gemara, which is very interesting, is to say, during a plague, do not walk in the middle of the street, but rather walk on the sides of the street. And the reason why that's so is because the angel of death walks in the middle of the street during a time of plague. And during a regular time where people are healthy, it says then you could walk in the middle of the street because the angel of death is on the side of the street. So this is a Gemara that's there. It's right after the Gemara we just read. And it's a little bit of an odd statement. Again, these images are just modern versions of the idea of a plague and the angel of death and so on and so forth. But what is meant by a Gemara which says, don't walk in the middle of the street, walk on the side of the street? So there's a question that was asked by a particularly great rabbi named Rabbi Shlomo ben Shimon Duran, named the Rashbash. He lived in the city of Algiers in northern Africa in the years 1400 to 1467. So he read this Gemara and he saw some deep meaning in it. Now this rabbi was someone that was actually well trained in the science of his time, not exactly our science, but he did have some familiarity with medicine. And I'm not going to read every line here, but what he says is the statement in the Gemara is a very important one. He said, but it's a metaphor. He says it is not to be taken literally as to walking in the center of the street as opposed to on the side of the street. He says this is a metaphor for the way we're supposed to conduct ourselves. He says, if you look inside, you could see it. He says that actually, normally, how are we supposed to conduct ourselves? Throughout the peacetime, regular time, the Rambam taught us that you're supposed to be in the middle of the road. Anything that you do, you kind of want to try and find the center. You want to find the middle. And when he talks about different character traits, how much to eat, what to do, how to be, he's always telling you, stay in the middle. And the Rashbash is saying that our Gemara is telling us is the middle is a good place to be at regular times. It says, but in a time of a plague, says the Rashbash, that's not the place to be. He says that at the time of a plague, he says at that point, for the extra protection, you have to take extremes and things that you wouldn't ordinarily do in terms of how much or how little you eat, or how you protect yourself, or what levels you go to. He says at a plague, the Gemara is telling you, don't do what you normally do. You have to depart from your regular activities, which are generally center of the road, and find the extreme that's going to bring you safety. So a very interesting approach and a way of taking the Gemara to teach us an interesting lesson that I think we're finding today. Who would have thought you'd be sanitizing packages as they come in from Amazon? But that is something that is an extreme that is being recommended at this point, or at least by some people recommended. And these types of things are the things that the Rashbash is telling us in a time of danger, in a time of a plague, where things are going on in the world around you, you need to take the extra steps, and it's appropriate to do so. And at that point, we ditch, so to speak, the general approach that we take, the approach of center of the road. Okay, very cute. But now I want to show you something that was written by the Maharisha. The Maharisha is Rabbi Shmuel Edels. He lived in Krakow, Poland, which was a pretty interesting city, and a big and important city for Jews for many, many years. He lived in that city between 1555 and 1631. The Maharisha is one of the really important commentaries on the Gemara, and he has many, many sharp insights. And here he says something very interesting. He says, Dever ba'ir kanes raglecha. He says, when there's a plague in the city, go inside, right? That's what we saw in the Gemara. So he says, well, go inside. He says, but actually go inside, that's only if you can't leave the city. He says, but if you could leave the city, if it's possible for you to go somewhere else in order to escape the plague that's going on in the city, that's the right thing to do. So he says the way to read the Gemara is not necessarily always go inside. He says go inside if you can't go somewhere else. And as I read his words, I couldn't help but think, do we go to deal? Which I think is the answer that many of the people in our community, people that are able, left New York City, and actually there were articles in the newspapers about a number of people leaving the city, whether to go to Jersey or to the Hamptons or so on, because I don't know if they were taking the Maharisha's advice, but taking the advice of leave the place, because if you can leave the place, that's safer. Of course, you might have seen this, which is that the people in New Jersey said that people from New York are not so welcome. In fact, I don't know, I was preparing the last few minutes of the class, I was getting text messages, which I'm not sure if they're correct or not, saying that New Jersey is asking people who come from New York, because there are so many cases, to quarantine for 14 days before going anywhere in New Jersey. So New Jersey may not actually be an answer for us, but just something that I think is a little bit interesting, a little bit cute. The idea of leave the city is not a new idea. It's something that goes at least back to 15th century Poland. So interesting idea, interesting case. I want to come a little bit closer to our reality, a little bit closer to our time. And one of the great Sephardic rabbis, very, very well known, Rabbi Yosef Chaim, the Ben Ish Chai, lived in Baghdad between 1835 and 1909. And he definitely, we know, would have experienced a number of what we call epidemics. He would have seen more than once an epidemic of cholera, because during that century, during the 19th century, we know that there are a number of epidemics of cholera that took place. And cholera, if you're not familiar, is a very, very debilitating disease. We now know what it comes from. Cholera, for the most part, is the result of not having clean drinking water. And many cosmopolitan cities in the 19th century didn't have the good water supply that we have today. And very often what would happen is human excrement would get into the water supply, it would contaminate it, and it would lead to these massive plagues of cholera. They weren't sure what was causing it at the time, but that's the case. There have even been outbreaks of cholera, even in our own times. If I'm not mistaken, there was a big cholera outbreak in the late 1990s in Iran. In any event, there's no question that the Ben Ish Chai would have seen a number of epidemics in his lifetime. And as a result, he had what to say about our Gemara. And I think what he has to say is fabulous, fantastic, and just really important. So allow me to show it to you. It's out of a book that he wrote called Ben Yehoyada. Ben Yehoyada is his commentary on the Gemara, especially the Agadic sections of the Gemara, the stories, the lessons, the messages that are told. And you can see here, I excerpted a large piece. The first column, he's just reviewing that which we saw already, the Maharisha, who talked about leaving the city and how that's a good idea to do. In the second column, if you look at the second line, he says, towards the end of the second line, if you're able to read alongside me, he says, Aval becholi ha-cholera, with the cholera disease, he says, even once it's in the city, better to leave. He says, there, locking yourself in the city, the quarantine, is not going to do you anything. Because this illness of cholera doesn't just hurt you from the physical sense. Yazik la'adam hapachad v'haba'ata. He says, because there's a tremendous amount of fear and anxiety. He says, and your people get sick not only from the cholera, but also from the fear and the panic. And then he tells a really fascinating and interesting story. He says, this is a story from the doctors. I'm not going to read it word for word, but he says a story that the doctors tell, in the town of Baghdad, which he calls a mashal u'melitza. It's not a literal story, it's an allegory, it's a riddle. And he says, so don't take it literally, but the message is very clear, what the message of the story is that he's trying to get across. And it says as follows. One time there was a plague of cholera in a big city. And before the plague had fully taken hold, a person found the agent of cholera, whatever that means, the angel of death. Again, remember, this is a metaphor and a story, not a reality. So a person finds the agent of cholera, and he says to the agent of cholera, he says, so tell me, how many lives do you plan to take in this plague that you're going to do? And the agent of cholera, very matter-of-factly, tells him 5,000. I'm going to claim 5,000 lives. At the end of the plague, it turned out that 15,000 people perished. And the person came back to the agent of cholera, and he said to him, hey, why'd you lie to me? Why'd you tell me 5,000 when in fact 15,000 were killed? So very interesting. The agent of cholera says to him, no, I only took 5,000 with my sword. However, the 10,000 died as a result of the panic and the fear that came as a result of me being there. And, this is a very intriguing comment and something that I think is definitely relevant to us today, which is that we're becoming very aware very quickly that when there's an epidemic, when there's a pandemic, it's not only the damage that gets done by the disease, which is bad, and we're just beginning to see that damage. But what we're also seeing is something that you'll call the collateral damage. And the collateral damage takes a lot of forms. Certainly one form is, as the Bnei Chai pointed out, the panic, the anxiety, the concern, the stress, and no question that is a very real thing. The anxiety that is caused by what's happening and how it makes people behave and what they do. And certainly a corollary of that, or part of what happens, is what damage it does to the economy. And the economy is significant, and we're all just beginning to see what impact that's going to be, and it's very frightening and honestly very damaging. And that's why you see the politicians, the president in particular, really concerned about we know we have to do this, but we don't like what it means when we have to do this. It's are we gonna we don't want anyone to die, but we also don't want everyone to go broke, because going broke is not the small thing, and it's not an insignificant thing, and it shouldn't be made light of. So the idea of a plague causing the damage that the plague caused is definitely a question, but the Chachamim were very, very aware that the damage that could be caused is not only to the plague, but it's not only as a result of the plague, not only the medical damage, but the mental, emotional, psychological damage, and I would say that the financial damage that results of that. Now, a little bit more on this is another type of damage, which those are, at least I would say, what you would call legitimate damage. But there's another damage that's going on, and that's this little symbol that keeps popping up into our lives at an unprecedented pace. The news that's being spread around, And one of the things that mental health experts are telling us is stay off chats. The chats have been, if your phone is doing anything like my phone is, it's been out of control. And a huge amount of what has been put on WhatsApp and other forms has not been true, has not been fully vetted. And there's a lot that's out there that's really problematic and just not factually correct. In fact, I'm going to share with you, I actually got permission from a particular community doctor who had an exchange with a sort of news outlet. He asked them, he said, hey, you put some info out that is not correct. And what's your source for doing that? And the response is, we're the source. And we published a lot of things, so therefore we must be right. And it really extremely, extremely problematic. So I'm not saying that source of news is not to be used, because maybe they have some news, but we really have to be careful about checking. And this goes to this next piece, which is you've no doubt heard that the idea of certain drugs have been, potentially, these drugs are potential lifesavers and cures and so on and so forth. I highly recommend you check out the YouTube video that I listed over there, Coronavirus, Hydroxychloroquine, Truths and Lies, by a Harvard physician who really explains out in much better form, what's the story with these things. And these things haven't been tested. So people will often say, well, what can it hurt? Well, it could hurt because there's a limited amount of these drugs. And some people actually need these drugs. And if people are staking their health on something that doesn't really work, these things can hurt. And the same thing holds true. Someone called the other day and said, these spices are in short demand. I don't know if we're going to be able to get them for Pesach. And we said, why are these spices in short demand? They said, well, don't you know it's part of the cure for the disease? Where did you get this from? And of course, it comes from WhatsApp, someone sending around some kind of video. What can it hurt? I mean, what do you mean, what can it hurt? If we don't act based on fact, if we don't based on what we know, it's tremendous hurt, and it could cause all sorts of issues. So please, during this time, take the extra step when you get information to check the facts. Checking the facts is very, very important. And this too speaks to the damage that the Ben Ish Chai was talking about, the damage that gets caused not only by the disease, but by the fear and the anxiety that comes from it. When we're fearful, we may not be as careful to think things through and to check things out. I want to share you another piece, which is really powerful and very, very important. And to my chagrin, a lot of people still not keeping up. And this is a statement by the Khatam Sofer. The Khatam Sofer, if you're not familiar with him, is someone named Rabbi Moshe Sofer Schreiber. He lived from 1762 till 1839. So he too would have seen some epidemics of cholera and the like, as we're going to see. And he lived in the German countries, if I'm not mistaken, Germany and Austria. And he's very famous for being very, very strict. He's a particularly strict rabbi on many, many issues. In fact, there's a famous phrase that he uses that many have quoted since then, which is Chadash Asur min HaTorah. That which is new is forbidden from the Torah. He was fighting against the Reform movement, so he coined that phrase. And so you can understand he was a very strict rabbi. That's a very important thing to realize. Now I want to show you what he said, and if you don't mind, I'm going to read this one inside. He was asked in the epidemic that was going on in his town, what do we do if the doctors are telling us not to go to shul, not to leave our house? Yom Kippur is coming. They apparently had their problem in the fall. We have our problem in the spring. But he was the people of his town, the people of his country were asking, what do we do? The doctors are telling us not to leave our houses, and it's Yom Kippur is coming. So he says like this, Lefi lashon hash'ela sharofim hizhiru mitzet petach beto b'ta'anit. He says, from the language of the question that you ask, that the doctors are commanding us not to leave the house on the fast day, Yom Kippur. Mashma shekashehem sigurim bebetam It sounds like from your question that when the people are quarantined or closed in their houses, en atanit mazik lahem, the fast doesn't do any damage to them. Im ken, he says, if so, yitanu, so then they should fast. V'yesh segurim, and then be closed up, be quarantined, but be in the fast. V'yitpalelu v'yechidut, and pray alone. Don't pray with minyan. V'lo yikra'u b'Torah, and don't read the Torah. Ki en ze kedai l'tchot isur karet b'deoraita. Don't push away an isur deoraita, meaning keep the fast if you could keep the fast. But the point that he's trying to make here on Yom Kippur, right, even more than Pesach, is if the doctors are saying stay inside, stay inside. If the doctors are saying that you shouldn't go outside, then the idea of praying b'minyan is finished. Don't do it. It's the wrong thing to do. And unfortunately, I'm hearing, even as of yesterday, I don't know, and actually someone told me today that people are still doing this, making minyanim in houses and backyards. What are you doing, people? You misunderstand what the Torah wants. The Torah wants people to be healthy. The doctors are telling you, even in small gatherings, when people are getting to one another, and even if you think you're standing 6 feet apart and so on, they're all telling you, don't do this. Don't do it. If the Khatam Sofer could tell you, pray b'yachid on Yom Kippur, who are you? What do you think you're doing? Be smart, be intelligent. You're causing danger not only to yourself, but to lots of other people around you. And we really have to be careful about this. And he continues in the next paragraph. I'm not going to go read each thing that he says here, but he makes a particular point of saying that if the doctors do say that the fast is not healthy, then he says that you have to be really careful, figure out, you should ask the doctors, how much must the person eat in order to stay healthy? And you eat only that much, and you eat it breaking it up over periods of time, so you don't eat a lot in a short period of time. It's achilat bizman kedei achilat pras, and he lists the time, whether it be 9 minutes, 2 minutes, and so on. But you can't eat for your benefit, you're only eating for your health. But what you see from this statement is something that's very, very important for us to learn in this message, and that our rabbis were very aware of all throughout the generations, is listen to the medical experts, listen to the doctors. Do not place what you think is a religious goal of praying with minyan or saying kaddish or visiting someone or lots of other things. We're going to see in a few weeks the seder, you want to be together with the family and so on. These are all things the doctors are being very clear on. Don't do it. It's not safe. It's not safe to you. It's not safe to others. If you haven't been aware, which I can't imagine anyone is not aware, New York City is the epicenter in the United States of America. I was just looking minutes before I started the class. There are 25,000 confirmed cases of coronavirus in New York. 25,000. 2 weeks ago, do you want to know what that number was? It was in the single digits. So we're not taking enough care. We're not being we're not segregating ourselves enough. As much as we've done, we have not done enough, and we have not done it fast enough. And we have to start taking this seriously. We've seen in the world that when the people listen to the doctors, we've seen in our time and in 1918 through the Spanish flu, we've seen that if the people listen to the doctors, you can stop this thing, you can minimize the damage. If you don't listen to the doctors, the damage is much, much greater. And here you have one of the strictest rabbis of all time, known for his strictness, with the biggest issue ever, Yom Kippur, right? Doesn't get much bigger than that. And he's telling you, listen to the doctors, stay home. We should be thinking the same way. One of the things that I think we see through all of this is how important the role of the communal leaders and the rabbis are at this time. It's very important for the rabbis to give good advice and to be responsible and to understand that the people are going to be looking up to them, and the people are going to be saying, hey, what do you have to say? What does the Torah have to say? It's always been the case. It was, we've seen, whether it be in the Gemara, which is in the year somewhere between 500 and 800, or we looked at the Rashbash, which was in the 1400s, and the Maharisha in the center here is in the 1500s, and the Bnei and the Khatam Sofer in the 18 and 1900s. These are serious things. As I was preparing this class, someone, I didn't even realize that this was true, but I found out I have a very personal connection to the cholera that we talk about. There were a number of cholera plagues, as I mentioned, in the 19th century, and there was a number that hit Syria, and in fact, one of my, I guess it's my mother's grandmother. My mother's grandmother, they just did a study of her family, and they traced back all the information and did family tree and so on and so forth. And while they were studying this, they noticed that both mother and father of Sam Jamal passed away during the same year. And they asked what happened. And they found out that both of his parents, so this would be my great-grandfather, both of his parents perished in a plague of cholera, and he was raised by his sister. So this is something that we've dealt with over and over again throughout the centuries. Baruch Hashem, we've survived, but not unscarred. And we have to learn the lessons from the past. We have to learn the lessons from the traditions. And these lessons are really important. So to go over these lessons, these are the points that we've made tonight. Number one, that this has happened before, which means that we could survive it. But we have to make sure that we turn to our tradition, because our tradition has what to say and has intelligent things to say about our current situation. One of the key things that we saw all the way through is the importance of staying inside. They understood this from the time of the Gemara, so we should be able to understand it today. If it's possible to get somewhere else and that provides safety, then that's something to think about. The idea of being extreme, normally where it's not our way. Normally we like to be very middle of the road. That's our normal way to go. But as we saw in the Gemara, when there are certain times where we say, no, we're going to take it to the nth degree, to the extreme. We saw a very particular danger, the danger of fear, and how in a very in a parable, but that the danger can do twice as much. That the danger of the fear is twice as much as the danger of the actual illness itself. Something to really take into consideration with the way that we're conducting ourselves. That need to listen to the doctors. They're working hard. They're telling us what to do. They're telling us how we can make things better. We have to be listening to them, and we have to be listening carefully. And we have to be not be as dismissive and say, no, that's not what I'm used to. It's not the way I live. It's not what I'm healthy. I'm different. We can't be saying things like that. And unfortunately, I've heard too many people hearing it, acting that way. We have to really be careful. And the rabbis have to set the tone. Baruch Hashem, I feel like in our community, and I'm on a lot of groups with rabbis around the world, I feel like here and in Israel, we've seen lots of examples of rabbis positively setting the tone. And of course, there's always going to be a few exceptions, but we shouldn't let those exceptions color our general view. But the rabbis and other community leaders have to really make sure that they set a good tone and a good example for everything that we need to do. So that's my brief presentation. I hope you found some of the ideas interesting, meaningful, and so on. I'm going to open the door to questions. I'm going to open the floor to questions. If anyone's interested, feel free to comment, question. Just unmute yourself and introduce yourself, and be happy to take some thoughts and comments and questions on the things that we brought up.
Rabbi, when is the next class?
Hi, Neil. How are you? First of all, it's great to see you, or see your name on the screen. So it's a great question. So we're doing daily classes at 7 a.m. and at 12 noon every day, Monday through Friday at 7 a.m. and 12 noon Monday through Thursday. There are other classes that we've emailed out about, but those are my classes. I'm going to be doing Tuesday night each week, God willing, to do something of this nature. So next week, I'm going to try and get to the laws of Pesach. As I mentioned in the email that I sent out late this afternoon, a lot of people are asking me a lot of questions about how we keep Pesach, either things that are new to them because they're not going away, or specific to this year, things like the siyum level of cleaning we have to do, and so on and so forth. So those are things that I'm going to be putting out in email in the next day or two, but also probably talking about next week on a class. So I hope that answers the question.
Rabbi, it answers the question, and you're giving a great class tonight. I really enjoying it.
Neil, it's always great to hear from you, and may you stay healthy and well.
You too. Stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? Feel free. Any questions?
Guys, don't leave. We have Arbit coming.
Yes, we're going to do our beat. If anyone's interested, we're going to do our beat at 9 p.m. It's actually something that we've done very nicely. Ezra, I want to thank Ezra Khatam, who's been to just about every minyan that we have. We don't have minyan, we have tefillah together, but it's really great. If you haven't done it, I have to tell you, I was a big skeptic when someone proposed it to me, but we said, let's give it a whirl. And it really, even though it's not minyan, it doesn't count as tefillah, but sibur, there's a real power to seeing the people that we love to pray with. And it's been really great. So I want to thank everyone who's been a part of that. And if you haven't been a part of it, I invite you to join us. We have minyan at 7:45 in the morning for shaharit. We pray together, 6:30 for mincha, and 9 p.m. for our beat. And it's been really special, really, really wonderful. I want to thank all the chazanim who've been helpful in that. Edward Azrak, Sally Haber, Jack Basul, many others. Really, thank you so much for the help, and please, anyone join. It's an uplifting experience.
Rabbi, thank you.
Rabbi,
Thank you for everything.
Thank you.
Zaka Baruch, I thought the class was very interesting, very timely, very appropriate, and very well put together, and it was interesting. Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, hopefully we get something to think
Zaka, thank you, Rabbi.
Rabbi.
Thank you, guys.
Rabbi.